Good morning. Today is May the 4th. This is a Budget Public Employees Committee. It is 9:42. Madam Clerk, please call the row.
Alderwoman Tanya,
Present.
Vice Chair Browning,
Present.
Alderwoman Velasquez, Alderman Devotie, Chair Aldrich.
Present.
5 present, we have quorum.
Thank you. With that, we have established a quorum. The next order of business will be the approval of minutes. I'll take a motion to approve minutes from Wednesday, May 25th, 2026.
So moved.
It was moved by the Alderwoman from the 7th, second by the Alderwoman from the 6th. Madam Clerk, please call the row.
Alderwoman Tanya,
Aye.
Vice Chair Browning,
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez, Alderman Devotie, Chair Aldrich.
Aye.
5 aye votes.
With that, we have approved the minutes from Wednesday, March 25th, 2026. Next order of business will be board bills for review. We have in front of us Board Bill number 1, which we will hold as we go through those department by department. Board Bill number 9 we will take up today, so I will Vice Chair Browning as I present Board Bill number 9.
Thank you. Alderman Aldridge, you are recognized on Board Bill number 9 at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the Budget and Public Committee. Board Bill number 9 that is in front of us is a one-time payment to our city employees of $1,000. What we're doing with this legislation, also have the director here, is we are trying to move very quick on this because this payout will come from the 2026 budget fiscal year as we are now working to the 2027. If I'm not mistaken, I believe there was leftover funds in the 2026 budget year. So we want to get this passed as quick as possible so that we can make sure our civil service employees who work extremely hard is kind of a way to incentivize them to just say thank you for all the great work that they do. Eventually, there will be a future pay bill that goes to the 3% for all employees. But again, what we're trying to do is get this done so that city employees can get a one-time lump sum, or I would say appreciation for all the hard work, which we can't. $1,000 is probably not enough to appreciate them, but it's a start, I would say, from the city of St. Louis to just try to show to our employees that we are thankful for all the great work they do. I do have the Director of Personnel here if he wants to say a few words, unless that was the gist.
For the record, Brian Light, Director of Personnel for the City of St. Louis. That was a great sum up, and that's exactly what we want to do. The only other thing that the bill does is increases the pay rates for employees in the probationary fire private, and probationary fire equipment dispatcher and fire equipment dispatcher job classification by 7% in order to provide parity with the St. Louis Police Department. We're required by charter to provide that parity, and so that piece is in this bill as well, so we can get that done as quickly as possible, in addition to the $1,000 lump sum payment.
All right, thank you. We'll go through the committee to see if anyone has any questions, starting with Alderwoman Sanye.
Thank you, Vice Chair Browning. I don't really have any questions. I'm grateful. I think this is great for our workers. I think it obviously does raise a flag that I'm sure is on all of our minds, the parity between the fire department and the police department with all of the ongoing conversations that we have in that budget. You know, that is something that's, you know, I think just a flag that I would definitely want to note for anyone who's watching at home, and I know is on many folks' minds. But I think, you know, this legislation in general to show appreciation to our workforce is in support of, and I would like to be added as co-sponsor.
Thank you. Alderwoman Velasquez.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Similarly to Alderwoman Sanye, I want to say thank you to Director Light and Alderman Aldrich for doing something like this. Obviously, we know that a long-term goal is to increase everyone's wages to at least get closer to market rate than we are now, but also I don't want to say it's a creative use. It is a creative use, but it also is a really good use of that money that we have to say thank you to our workers. So thank you your creativity in this short time in getting it done. And thank you to Alderman Aldridge for creating this bill. And I would also like to be added as a co-sponsor, Madam Clerk. I have no questions.
So noted.
Alderman Devoti.
No questions.
Thank you. I also have no questions. Appreciate this being brought. Would like to be added as a co-sponsor.
So noted.
Back to you, Alderman, for closing.
Thank you. I do want to thank Director Light.
Alderman, 1 second. I forgot to ask. Is there any public testimony on Board Bill 9?
Public testimony on Board Bill 9. Good catch, Vice Chair.
I didn't see any written testimonies in the drive. And no, I do not have any on 9.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, Alderman, now you're recognized to close.
Thank you to Director Light. I'm sure some way, somehow, he's a money guy. I'm sure Paul had something to do with it. If he did, give him his flowers now, because this has been his Super Bowl with working on the budget. Thank you to both of them for, like the Alderman from the 6th Ed, creating a creative way to just show appreciation. There will be later down the line pay study that will increase the wages of city employees. But we wanted to make sure that this gets done first, as this will be coming out of the 26 budget. With that, I would ask for a do pass recommendation on Board Bill number 9.
Thank you. At this time, I'll accept a motion for a due pass recommendation for Board Bill number 9.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by the Alderwoman from the 6th, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 7th. Madam Clerk, please call roll.
Alderwoman Sanye.
Aye.
Vice Chair Browning.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velazquez.
Aye.
Alderman Devoti.
Aye.
Chair Aldrich.
Aye.
5 aye votes.
With that, Board Bill 9 has passed, and sending it back to you, Alderman Aldridge.
I could stretch it. Is somebody else? All right, with that, we will move to the next item of business, since Board Bill number 1 is being held. And we will have committee discussion on Board Bill number 1, which is the city general operating budget. Just to give kind of a little bit of process of how the budget works in the city of St. Louis. So each year, the city of St. Louis fiscal year is a little different. So our fiscal year actually begins on July 1 and it ends on 3rd. The budget process begins typically in the fall with the budget division issuing requests for department revenue estimates. At the same time, department heads are asked to identify any new initiatives or programs so they may be included in the budget process. In January, there's a preliminary revenue estimate that comes from the fiscal year and incorporated any new initiatives. The budget department respond by submitting their budget, departments respond by submitting their budget requests to our budget director. Roughly in February, the budget division hold budget meetings with those departments and administrations to discuss their proposed budget. In April, the board prepares the budget and then it goes in front of ENA. ENA is made up of the comptroller, the president, and the mayor. Typically, the budget director, our all-star Mr. Paul Payne, will present the budget to ENA. Then the ENA will have a one-time public hearing to hear from the community. I do want to thank everybody that came out a few weeks ago. I think the mayor and the president said that was the most community people they had seen in their time. And then after the community input, a week later, it is voted out. Once it is voted out, the budget comes in front of us, the Board of Aldermen, where I always say we do the kind of best job by going through the full budget department by department, from various departments, from refuse to fire, to pretty much every major department in the city of St. Louis, to actually go line by line to hear their budget. we at the Board of Aldermen are required to actually get a budget done and sent back to ENA for their approval by, again, July 1st. If there's any changes made to the budget, which this committee has made changes in the last year, if it's been for impacted tenants fund or building division and refuse workers, those changes then have to go back to ENA. ENA have to approve them, and then they have to come back to the budget committee before we send it to the full floor and then vote it out. First, we will have Director Paul Payne come up and give an overview of the city's budget. Bless you, Alderwoman. This year is a little different. One of probably the most critical departments in the city of St. Louis that it makes up a large chunk of the budget is the police department, which this year they have decided not to present their budget. After the overview budget is presented by Paul Payne, if there are any high-level questions that members may have over the police budget, you can ask them. Mr. Paul Payne is limited to some of those questions because you do not work for the department, so tricky situation this year, but we'll try to high-level go over the police department outside of the general operating budget for the whole city of St. Louis. So with that, Mr. Payne, you can come on up. Madam Clerk, do we have the presentation ready? And then after Mr. Payne presents his budget, we will have questions from the committee. If you are in the room or if you're online, if you're in the room, make sure you sign up. There's a sign-up sheet over to the right where we would take public testimony. And then if you're online, when we get to the public testimony part, we will have you raise your hand so that we can make sure that you're recognized. Whenever you're ready, Director Payne, you may present the FY27 fiscal year budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee. The proposed FY27 annual operating plan totals $1.41 billion. It's a modest 0.5% increase over the prior fiscal year. And in this first graphic you'll see on the presentation, it breaks up the budget within a number of fund categories, the largest of which is the general fund, which is our main operating fund. It stands at a proposed $637.1 million. That's a 4.9% increase. If you remember last year when I stood before you, we were addressing a reduction in the general fund due to the refunds that were coming from earnings and payroll tax receipts. So we weathered that storm somewhat, and so much of the increase this year is because that series is over now, and we've seen revenues sort of leveling off, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But talking about the refund levels, it's slightly higher than what it was before, but it's not certainly not as much as what we experienced last year. The overall growth in revenue, I've got about 1.7%. In the special revenue categories, $257.6 million, that's a 3.9% increase. The use tax, we've appropriated some available balances there of $5.9 million. We also have some miscellaneous funds that are increasing $3.7 million, and the gaming fund is up by about $1 million. In the grant fund categories, at $71.9 million, that's a 18.3% decrease. A big chunk of that is, if you remember last year, we appropriated $20 million in interest monies. That was a one-time. We do have $5 million of ARPA interest appropriated. It's not particularly a grant, but it's in that fund, and so that's why you see that decline there. In the debt service fund, that's $13.1 million. That fund is utilized to pay property tax debt, property tax levied supported debt, and that's basically flat in the current fiscal year. Capital improvement funds at $50.4 million. That's a 17.9% decline. As you know, in the capital fund, there are a number of sources: the half-cent sales tax, there are park sales taxes, and other miscellaneous funds. But then the biggest driver in the variability from year to year has been how much of a prior year surplus we have. Now, in the last couple of years, we've had a significant surplus so that we were able to use that. Last year, it was not so much. And so what you're seeing is a decline in those available funds, so you'll see a smaller capital improvement fund coming up this year. In the enterprise fund categories, which is water and airport division, $335.2 million, basically flat, is about 0.9% decrease. Water division is down by $5 million, and you'll see airport budget is up by $2.2 million. And then in the internal service funds categories of $49.9 million, that is down 5.7%. The internal service funds are those funds where departments are charging each other for various services. The largest one last year that we implemented was the one where we had 4 departments charged or providing services to the police department as a way of accounting for those services. During the fiscal year, the police department absorbed both the Department of Personnel's police unit as well as the legal unit. And so those 2 have gone away. So what remains is the equipment services piece as well as facilities management. So you see a decline there from about $16 million to $10 million. And as the graphic shows, the general fund is 45% of the budget. Next slide, please. And these several next pages are going over some of our major revenue sources. In the first page, earnings and payroll taxes, as I mentioned last year, we had a significant decline because of the refunds. And so this year, you see the big jump. Fiscal year to date, 46.6%. Of course, that's skewed by the refunds we did last year. Underlying individual withholdings, so when you want to say, well, how much is it actually growing if you extract out the noise? The withholdings are up 3.7%. So we are still seeing some growth through the third quarter of the current fiscal year. In the payroll tax, it was the same phenomenon. It was up 14.2%, but it was not as dramatic as the tax. Results were again skewed by the refunds. Underlying receipts up a little bit more modestly at 1.7% through the fiscal third quarter. This next slide. In the sales tax, if you recall last year, we actually had a decline of 4.6% in the sales tax. So in this year, I put a modest increase, and we actually are, it actually has bounced back a little bit. It's up 3.6% through the third quarter. Again, the sales tax is not a strong growth grower on revenues. Its 10-year growth rate's about 1.2%. But it has, in more recent years, with inflation rising, it has gone up a bit. But it usually trails that of the other taxes. The local use tax, on the other hand, also is up 2.8%, and it was down last year. It is becoming more and more, it's taking on more and more characteristics of the sales tax, and that is more consumer-driven as opposed to business-driven. Last year it was down 5.3%, and last year it was down 5.3%, but its 10-year growth rate is over. And the next slide. In restaurant and hotel tax receipts, we've had a divergence of trends, and the restaurant gross receipts are up about 7.6% through the fiscal third quarter, and then it has a growth rate of about 2.7%. And contrast that with the hotel tax receipts, which were down 5.8%. So this year, our receipts have declined, and but their growth rate is 4.6% over the last 10 years. And so this is just a snapshot of both the general fund and some of their major special revenue funds. If you remember last year when I was before you, there was a lot of red ink on this page because of the earnings and payroll taxes and sales tax declines. If you look, the FY26 estimate of all these funds was $777 million. Through the third quarter, we're tracking about 804, so that would be 26 over that estimate. And so the general fund is about 18.7, tracking through the third quarter over estimate. The FY27 estimate, which we will get into shortly, we got about a 1.7% overall estimated growth. Now, before I get into the actual general fund details, I just wanted to, this page sort of gives you overall highlights regardless of fund. In employee pay and benefits, as the chair discussed earlier, we have a proposed $18 million allocated for pay increases for various city employee groups. One of them is entry-level salaries are being brought up to with 5% of market to help with some of the recruiting our vacant positions. other individuals who are not affected by that adjustment will get a 3% across the board increase. And of course, it incorporates the 7% pay increases which were approved for uniformed police and firefighters. There is a $3.8 million increase in health insurance, which is up about 5.3%, and that includes a $1.6 million increase for the police retiree health benefit, which is in their police department budget. And overall pension costs went down by $6.5 million, reflecting the improved market returns from the last year across all 4 systems. In emergency housing and neighborhood stabilization, we've got $2 million, a special initiative for the forestry division you'll be hearing from for their weed and debris cleanup. Mostly it's for catching up those things. They have contractors who do weed and mowing and things like that, but oftentimes you're going to have some overgrown areas that they need to address that can't be typically reached by those efforts, and so this hopefully will address those. There's $2 million to continue the Code Blue emergency housing program through the local use tax. $4 million increase for derelict building demolition. Again, local use tax funds as well as Prop P use tax funds. $1 million increase for the Right to Counsel housing initiative, and $1 million increase for continuing support of the Tiny Homes program. In public safety, as I mentioned, there's an $8.6 million increase to the police department, including a 4.3%, which is a 4.3% overall increase, including pay increase. That excluded grant funds. A $5 million reappropriation of ARPA interest to fund the completion of the PSAP. As you know, the PSAP, we're bringing to conclusion, at least construction conclusion, with the funds from ARPA as well as capital funds and proposed GOB, general obligation bond funds. $2 million increase to the Division of Corrections for overtime and inmate medical costs, and a $300,000 plus increase to SEMA for additional staff and contract for emergency planning. Other services, we've got $5 million increase to meet the rising costs of police-related judgments. You'll see a significant increase in the city councilor's office. $1.3 million increase to the street department. $600,000 of that is for replenishing the salt supply to bring their total up to $1 million, and contract snow removal. $500,000 for the traffic division to conduct a study of street signage and striping inventory, and a $200,000 increase in refuse for its picking up and removing abandoned tires. $2.6 million increase for equipment services and facilities management related to their maintenance and efforts of facilities as well as equipment. The $1 million for a board of election commissioners, because it's an election year next year and we have 4 scheduled elections. And then a $500,000 general fund subsidy to the communications division. That's our first time we'll be doing that because their revenue source, which is the cable franchise fee, is declining. Total overall workforce changes, it's a net reduction of 22 positions in the general fund and a reduction of 82 positions across all funds. Okay, the next slide, I go into details with the general fund specifically. So in the original estimates for FY26, it's $607.4 million. As I mentioned, through the third quarter, we're tracking about $18.7 million. If you add in the net growth assumptions for next year of 1.7%, that adds another $10.9 million. That gives you a revenue base to work with of about $637.1 million. So if you take the beginning base budget for FY26, which is 607.4, what I've identified below are some of the increases and decreases in the various departments. And I won't go through all of them, but I'll highlight some of the larger ones. As I mentioned, in general government, the biggest ones there you'll see are under city councilor. The increased judgment accounts of about $8 million. Typically, we budget about $6 million per year for judgments, $4 million through the police department and $2 million for everyone else. This year, we're proposing $11 million, of which $10 million will be in the city councilor's office and $1 million will be in the police department. That's just to reflect the ongoing activity and increased activity related to judgments. In the department of, and they also have some additional contractual services to address some of those costs of cases. In the finance, some miscellaneous reductions and other increases within the comptroller's office. The next slide, in the citywide accounts. Citywide accounts is that department we call it is with the number 190. And we call it citywide accounts because it's not specific to any one department. It's sort of a collect-all for things that we pay for regardless of department, or it's sort of a holding account for those items. And the biggest change there is, if you remember last year, we had that $10 million for salary adjustment. Well, that has been now distributed across the department, so you're not going to see that in the 190. That's why you see a decline there. Other items, we've got a refuse fee, collection fee service there to collect our revenue. That's a $200,000 increase. And I mentioned that subsidy to the communications division. You'll see that in again, and that's in 190's department or cost center. And then we have some decline in the courthouse capital debt to the capital fund of $800,000. In the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, there are some increases. Forestry particularly, the Forestry Division adds 5 positions for weed and debris, and a decrease in per performance and contract services offsetting that somewhat. In the county offices, as I mentioned, the biggest increase you're going to see there is the $1 million for the Board of Elections, because we have 4 elections next year, and that it goes up and down based on how our election schedules work. In judicial offices, the circuit court actually submitted their budget request, and they incorporated within their request a 4.5% increase. So, and of course, we're required to appropriate what the court's request, and so those 2 increases between the circuit court as well as the juvenile division, as well as some other increases in contractual services, are $1.2 million and $1.7 million respectively. The circuit attorney is up at $0.9 million next year, but it also has some reductions in the special fund category, which offset part of that increase. And the sheriff is a net increase of 2 positions of about $300,000, net offsetting with some miscellaneous cuts. In the next slide, I mentioned some of the street division changes. Some of those incorporate, the director of streets is actually just moving some positions from their 510 cost center to towing the telecom positions. The traffic divisions and cutting 5 vacant positions with limited increases in supporting accounts. I'm going to mention, you're going to, as we go through this, I forgot to mention that there are a number of departments where we cut some vacant positions and reduce the salary savings. You're going to see that more so in corrections. But we're trying to shrink the TO to reflect what's actually occurring and sort of right-sizing that. And there's a long way to go on that, but there are some reductions of vacant positions scattered throughout this budget. In the street towing I mentioned, with the new the telecom positions moved to that. In the street division, they're adding $235K for salt replenishment. That brings that account to about $1 million. And a $400,000 item for contract snow removal. They also have a number of vacant positions cut as well. In the refuse division, 1 vacant position, the debt service for their facility is actually expired now, so that item went away. But then we got an increase of $200,000 for tires. And throughout this budget as well, you're going to see some increases in the gas and the fuel accounts. And refuse is one of the larger users of those. In the police department, uniform salaries increased about 7%, and we've got overtime and civilian salaries are up by $2.2 million. Overtime is up $400,000. It includes some items in there that were not actually within the original request, but we have to budget for, and that's namely retiree medical as one of the largest. It's about a $16 million item, and it's $1.6 million increase over the current fiscal year. The legal services, contractual, and judgment accounts, $2.7 million increase. And then the internal services account, I wanted to point that out. That was where I was talking about it before, where we had 4 departments that were in a special fund, a special internal services account fund to charge the police department. Now, again, 2 of those have gone away. As within the police department, that was in personnel and legal, and so that that was in their budget this year is down to $10 million. Or it was 16 plus, I'll say that. And so it's down to 10. So that's why you see that decline of $6.2 million. But overall in the general fund, they are up 12.9. And police pension, as I mentioned, all the four systems were down, had declined by $3.1 million. In the fire department, the largest increase is related to pay. And as you're familiar with, the firefighters get the pay parity provision. So when the police uniforms get an increase, they get the same increase, and it's up 7%. That is the largest increase, increase within their budget. It also contributes to an increase in overtime. So that department itself is up by $6.1 million. Fire pension, both FRS and FRP, declined 1 point. In other areas of public safety, the Director of Public Safety is up a couple $100,000. It includes a $107,000 line item in contractual services for PSAP consultant. SEMA, as I mentioned earlier, includes a couple of new positions, as well as about $50,000 in contractual planning for its office. Excise Commissioner, one new liquor control officer. They cite increased workload in working with the state to enforce their video gaming issue. The Building Division, that reduction of 3 vacant positions, but includes $160K in contractual services. Neighborhood stabilization is pretty flat. City Justice Center, as I mentioned, we've cut 25 vacant positions and reduced the salary savings, but their big increase is overtime, $450,000, and then in their meals and medical contracts, so that the total budget for them is up $2 million. Let me see, the Director of Human Services, it includes $70K for decommissioning tiny homes, but we have $1 million in their use tax fund to fund continuation of the tiny homes. And in Board of Public Service, the largest increase, as I mentioned, for facilities management. You'll see increases in the utility lines and contractual maintenance increases, as well as equipment services, which includes contractual maintenance increases as well. So the total increase in the general fund is just under $30 million, $29.7 million, bringing the total budget to $637.1, and that's a balanced budget. The next slide. On the next slide, we're discussing general fund revenue outlook. So this illustration shows the various components of the major sources of revenue to the general fund. In the earnings tax, as I mentioned, the estimated receipts are $255.1 million. That's a 2% increase over the current fiscal year. As I mentioned, again, the trends have been, there is still underlying growth there. The refunds that we're encountering now, though slightly higher than before the pandemic, are not as high as we had anticipated coming into this current fiscal. So that's a good thing. And so as long as there's continued growth, we haven't seen any decline there. The property tax, however, we do anticipate some reduction in the growth in property tax values, mostly related to the tornado, because that's going to have an impact on our valuations. We typically have something like a 2%, but something close to approaching 4% reduction estimated through the tornado receipts, which means you'd have something like on the order of a 2% decrease. So in adjusting for the rate that's available that we are authorized to charge, it would result in something close to flat in the real property tax category, a slight increase in the personal property. In sales taxes, $63.8 million, again, reflecting the growth we had this year, but actually I'm somewhat conservative on the next year of a 1% growth rate, closer to the 10-year growth rate we've experienced. Now, I know this is a small item, but I bring it up because it's relatively new and people are interested in this. On the marijuana sales tax, we had estimated $1.7 million. It is coming in at $1.4 million. And I've got a $1.4 million estimate for next year. I understand there's a lot of things going on in Jeff City to address some of that. I suspect that there's a big part of the market that we're not capturing in some of these receipts. So hopefully that it'll be interesting to see whether we start beginning to see that return to on the revenue side. Payroll tax receipts estimated at $47.7 million. Again, that's up from last year at 47.2 revised estimate, and a 1.1% increase over the current fiscal year. And franchise utility taxes, $62.7 million. That's a 12.7% increase. The big increases here are that this year we're falling short simply because Water Division has lagged behind in paying its share of the gross receipts. We do expect that those to resume next year, and that would be about a $5 million difference from where they're at this year. And then the airport also has submitted a gross receipts estimate of about $9 million, which is almost $2 million higher than the current fiscal year. Intergovernmental receipts at 21.6 million. That's a 4.5% increase. Licenses primarily flat at 13.1 million. Departmental receipts at 59.5 million, a slight decrease, or a modest decrease of 4.8%. And then the other category, 29.5 million, including a 2.3% decline. A lot of those revenues include miscellaneous transfer, but one of those is the telecom tax receipts, which we've seen over the years has been on a downward trajectory. On the next slide, it's the general fund expenditure outlook. And I won't repeat what I've gone through the highlights, but in general government, you can see up 47.2 million, or up to 47.2 million, which is a 27.2% increase. That reflects the increase in that judgment account, which is in the city councilor's office. The decline in non-departmental receipts, that 22.3% decline to 33.6 million, that reflects the $10 million that we had budgeted in this year for pay, which has been distributed across the departments. Circuit Court reflects their pay increases. Then Election Board at 13 million, that's a 10.5% increase. Again, that's their $1 million increase for scheduled elections. And Facilities Management is up, and ESD up by 8%. That's $37.6 million in Board of Public Service. Again, the total general fund budget at $637.1 million. Public safety is 51.8% of that. Next slide. In the special fund categories, the local use tax fund is probably the largest, and it's budgeted at $73.3 million. The use tax fund was up 2.8% year to date. It's a revised estimate of $60.2 million, plus appropriating balances that had accrued within a number of these accounts as one-time efforts to address some certain initiatives. I've got the Affordable Housing Commission, which receives $5 million per year, but its budget is $6.7 million as it's appropriated $1.7 million available to that account. Healthcare Trust Fund receives $5 million per year also, and we're appropriating $6 million, again, $1 million from that account. And then Building Demo is $3 million per year, and we're budgeting $2.5 million, which remains unspent from prior years, so it's a $5.5 million total. And then the excess use tax account, we have various departments that are funded from that source. The City Councilor's Affirmative Litigation Unit, that's $700,000. And then I've got that Forestry Division Weed and Debris Initiative. That's the one-time initiative utilizing existing use tax funds of $2 million. Refuse Division's Bulky Pickup at $1.1 million. Building Division Housing Conservation at $3 million. Office of Violence Prevention, that's where that program is funded in the local use tax fund at $8.8 million. Fire retirement and police retirement are also a portion of that is in there. Police department and police pension, that's $20.3 million. That's down $3.8 million from that source. And the health department, this is the primary funding source, local funding source for the health department at $13.7 million. And then the human services, as I mentioned, the Code Blue program is funded within that department, as well as the $1 million Right to Counsel initiative is also funded within the Human Services Department in the local use tax fund. In the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, this again is allocated by ordinance. 60% of the economic development sales tax goes to transit, And at the end of the current fiscal year, it's projected to have $101 million in that account. And next year would be $14 million in addition. 10% goes to neighborhood stabilization, of which PDA and CDA divvy up those funds. $1.9 million for PDA, including $500,000 to SLDC, and CDA includes $1.2 million for neighborhood revitalization. Now, the 10% that goes to workforce development, Slate is the primary recipient of $3.5 million, and Director of Human Services also receives $1.5 million for a total of $5 million budget. 10% goes to public safety infrastructure. The Comptroller's Office supports the 911 increment of $500,000. SEMA also has their mass notification system funded there of $100,000, but the largest allocation of that piece is for the PSAP of $1.8 million. And then the remaining 10% is budgeted within the capital fund of $2.4 million. In the next slide, the half-cent public safety sales tax, use tax, known as Prop P. It's another allocation determined by ordinance. 66% goes to the police department of the $23.8 million sales tax with a budget of $15.5 million. 28% is allocated to the fire department, and 6% is allocated to the circuit attorney. And there are some various balances there with a total of $24.9 million budgeted. And there is along with Prop P, which was a half-cent sales tax, there was an increase in the use tax. And the use tax also was allocated proportionally by ordinance with these percentages. 25% is allocated to after-school and summer jobs programs. Of that amount, Director of Public Safety has $0.5 million. The Police Cadet Program is $0.7 million, and a one-time Slate Summer Jobs Program was added at $1 million, bringing that share up to $2.2 million. The Circuit Attorney is 7.7%, so that's in addition to their 6% of the sales tax itself, and that's $500,000. The Recreation Division gets 25%, and they use that for recreation programming, about $2 million. Building Demolition, they get 17.3%. But this also incorporates, as I mentioned, we're allocating funds that have not been spent in prior years of $2.7 million, bringing that total appropriation to $3.8 million. And 25% is allocated to social work and mental health to the Department of Human Services for $2.4 million. So that portion, the use tax portion of the Prop P sales tax is $10.9 million. On the next slide, I discuss the capital fund. The capital fund is budgeted at $50.4 million. As I mentioned, that's a decrease of $11 million from the previous fiscal year. And as also, as I mentioned, the reason for that decrease is the smaller operating surplus from the prior fiscal year. There have been years when we don't have a surplus. So anytime we do, that's a good thing. We're able to allocate. It's a one-time source, one-time use that we allocate to the capital fund. But this year, it was of the surplus, it was $4.1 million, as you recall, maybe it was allocated to the flood wall program, which left the capital fund with $5.3 million. And so you can see the allocations. The half-cent sales tax is the largest source, and those are allocated by ordinance. Of course, you as alder people get $10.7 million for projects within your wards. And then various accounts, 20% goes to citywide projects, 17% goes to major parks, 3% goes to recreation, and 10% of that half-cent sales tax goes to police. And also in the box next to the graphic there, I just identified those projects that got the surplus funds, everything from ADA transition planning to parks and public safety, EMS vehicles, and other municipal building improvements. The next slide highlights some of the changes in personnel totals. As I mentioned, the total general fund, 4,696 positions, went down by 22 positions. Special funds at 642 positions went down by 59. Grant funds at 179 positions went down by 10, and the enterprise funds at 898 went up by 9. That's a total for all funds at 6,415 positions, down by 82. And the next slide just puts that in a historical perspective. The last 10 years, the general fund is down by 349 positions. Special funds are up by 185. Grant funds are down by 120, and the enterprise funds are holding at about a 15 position increase. So the overall decrease over the last 10 years is about 206 positions. Moving on to pension costs. As I mentioned, the budgeted contributions for pensions is down by $6.5 million, reflecting the improved market performance in the past year. This graphic shows each of the, combined the four systems we have. We have the police retirement system. We also have the fire retirement system, which is frozen, and then the active fire retirement plan, which are both managed by the FRS board. Then we have the employee retirement system, and so that's our four systems we talk about. And the total cost of all those contributions and costs associated with the pension systems is $101.4 million. In terms of in the next slide, it shows what the funding status is. A lot of numbers on this page, but I think it's important to go over them. The systems are fairly well funded. They're close to around 80% or 80% or more, which is what you want to see. However, they are very expensive to maintain. As I mentioned, it's over $104 million in the budget to maintain them. In ERS, the funded status is on an actuarial basis is 76.1%, but you also see with markets, there's two numbers there. One is for the actuarial estimate, smoothed over a period of years, and then the actual market, what it was at the end of last September. And the market is 79%. So there are some gains that haven't been recognized yet. Of course, this can be affected by every year. Each plan year ends at the end of September. In the fire retirement area, the FRS is funded at 91.7%, and the market funding is 96.3%. In FRP, it's funded at 80.6%, with the market at 84%. And police at 83.2%, with market at 87.8%. And again, the cost, while the funding status has never really been an issue with the city, as you might other cities, the cost itself is very high. And as a percentage of payroll, it's significant. So that's one area where we always want to look for ways that we can offset increases to help address salaries. And as I mentioned in the comment off to the side, our unfunded liabilities of $534 million. Now, I should point out that it does not include the OPEB of the retiree health provided to the police department, which is another liability of $379.2 million. The next slide, we discuss general fund balances. And this is, we've done well in the last number of years on this score. The general fund reserves on a cash basis stood at $154.1 million, or 24.2% of the FY27 budget. That's slightly lower than last year, simply because if you remember, we, in addition to one half of the surplus that goes to capital, we budgeted the other $9 million to surplus to tornado relief. So the surplus did not, the fund balance did not go up over the last. And GFOA's best practice is to maintain at least 2 months of general fund expenditures, and which is at 16.6%. And of course, this year is end of year is pending. And the final slide, just to recap, FY27 budget at $1.41 billion, essentially flat at 0.5% from the prior fiscal year. General fund budget, $637.1, it's up 4.9%. The revenues have been stabilizing with the refunds, with the tax refunds, earnings and payroll leveling off, and modest overall growth going forward. General and special fund budgets include funds for addressing employee pay and benefit increases, emergency housing and neighborhood stabilization initiatives, funding needs for public safety and other city services. The capital budget's at $15.4 million, a decline of $11 million, reflecting smaller prior year surplus funds. And $5 million in ARPA interest is being reappropriated to help fund the PSAP to be combined with capital funds and planned general obligation bond funds to complete funding of that project. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. I'll open it up to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Budget Director. Also, for folks in the audience, we had a little error with the paperwork, so we do have updated presentations. There were some slides missing, so if you want those updated ones so that you can have them for the future, they're now over there. Before we go into questions, is there like any, I guess with the police department, like high level things that I'm just looking at the budget, I see it looks like mainly a change of this year is there's incorporation of 7% increase for uniform officers for a 4.3 increase over the fiscal year. Are there any like major things that's like, I guess, different from this year's budget?
I don't think so. I mean, other than the ones that I highlighted with the internal service funds declining because they incorporated 2 of those departments into their budget themselves. Obviously, the big item, big question is the funding status and is the city's position that we're meeting our statutory obligations, but that's sort of where we are with the funding status. The 4.3% increase, I think, is a significant increase for the department that large, and I believe it meets what they propose to be their needs in the coming fiscal year.
Okay. I'll start in order of seniority with questions from the committee, starting with Vice Chair Browning.
Thank you. So there's not going to be a separate presentation on the police budget.
No.
Okay, I have a lot of questions about it.
I might be able to address some high level type things, but if it's operational, I would be.
I fully expect that you can't
Okay.
answer
Right.
operational questions,
Sure.
but I think there's a lot of concern on the city
Okay.
side of things
Okay,
that I
sure.
definitely want to get into. But so I'll just start with my general budget questions and then I'll get into that. So I saw that department fees and fines are down by 4.8%. Why is that? I know that we've increased fees recently. We've done some things to try to make sure that they can collect more, as well as incentivize negligent property owners to do things, and some other fees and fines. Some of this is new, but it probably just went into effect in the last year, but I'm a little surprised to see fines and fees are down. Is that a collection issue? Is that a why aren't we collecting as many fines and fees this year?
Let's see here. We go into the estimate.
I think it's page 12.
Yeah, that's right. I think the biggest decline there is I've pulled back on the interest earnings for next year, which would not affect. It's not the categories that you're addressing. We've been getting significant amounts of interest earnings that are not related to fee activity from building division. I think if you look at the building division's estimate, it's somewhat comparable to what it was this year. So
Okay.
you're not going to see declines in those categories.
And we'll get into that when we have them in front of us. The capital half-cent sales tax, you said a small portion of that goes to the police department. What is that for?
Primarily, it is utilized for paying off an existing debt service obligation, about $1.6 million that was issued a number of years ago for improvements to their area command stations, as well as some headquarter improvements. The remainder of that is allocated just their own capital needs.
Okay, that's helpful. And then pensions. I'm quite alarmed by the unfunded liabilities. $534 million, that's not including the retiree health liability. And just to be clear, that retiree health liability is because we're now required to pay lifetime health insurance under the state law. Is that correct?
Well, let me give you a little history of that. Okay. So prior to local control, we operated under that state statute where it provided that the city shall provide retiree health insurance for all retirees of the police department, both uniform and civilian. And that was included within their budget all the way up to when we got local control. When we assumed local control, it was determined that we would continue to provide as those who were on the payroll at that time, grandfathered in, those people, but anyone hired after the time we assumed the department would not be eligible. They would be just like the rest of us in city government. So that they were the only ones that got that benefit, and that would no longer be provided. When the department was reassumed, or when the department took the police department under its wing again, the argument was that statute then applies that all department employees would be by the retiree health insurance program. But so what that meant was that not only were those grandfathered employees, again, who were always covered, but it meant that anyone hired since going back to 2013 is now eligible. So that added a significant increase in the liability. So in order to calculate that, they have an actuary, and an actuary looks at those. And this was done last year. And they estimated that of the people who were not eligible, they estimated the total of about 600. And they estimated the accrued cost over that time was about $29 million, or more than $29 million. And they estimated that will continue to go up. This year's cost was estimated at $6.6 million. So that was a cost that was anticipated to go down over time and just be eliminated, just sort of gradually fade away. But now it is increased and it will continue to go up over time. The interesting thing about OPEB, that's other than pension employee benefits, is that in a pension system, you pay for the current year benefits, plus you pay for unfunded liabilities. Unfunded liabilities can happen if you have returns that are below market estimate, or something changes in the demographics and they change assumptions. And you pay that off like a mortgage on a house. You pay the current cost plus you pay the mortgage. The OPEB, what's unique about the OPEB is this is strictly pay as you go. There is no 80% funding. It's whatever the health insurance premium bills are, estimated at $16 million next year, and you just pay it. And so that's what's a little alarming from that standpoint, and that from a balance sheet standpoint, that's went up and it's going to continue to go up.
That's very concerning. So there's not really a plan to address that long term? No.
They're basically, OPEB has been a sort of an unusual animal. That is that particular benefit, that department is the only one that has that benefit. And in other cities, there have been debates about whether or not it should be funded as a pension system. I mean, you start contributing towards the amortization of an unfunded liability as such. But no movement has been made to that point.
Is it unusual for cities to have 4 different pension systems?
I don't know if the number is unusual, but you'll typically see multiple pension systems based on certain groups of employees. It would be unusual, I think. I think what we did with fire was unusual in that we actually froze and created a new one. You don't see that often. But you also don't see it often that the state, for instance, on the instance of police retirement, there is no ordinance here. It's all state statute. So it's the state governing that. You don't see that very often in other cities as well.
Yeah, well, obviously we only have the only 2 cities in the entire country where the state has taken over the police department and its operations. And that is very interesting, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But first, I just want to thank you, Mr. Payne. I'm always impressed by your presentations, your knowledge of our budget. We're very lucky to have you here in St. Louis. In previous years, we've done this budget many times, and I think every time you come with just everything we need to hear and all the answers that we ask. So I really appreciate that. I did have some questions about the police budget prepared today because I think it's really I describe it as an existential threat to St. Louis, this state takeover. I want to start off by saying I do have a lot of respect for our policemen and women. I work with districts 2 and 5. The 9th Ward is split between the two, and whether it's Major Marks, Captain Ziff, Captain Obashan, Captain McCloskey, all of the police I've had the opportunity to work with have been doing a great job, and both my constituents and I value the work that they do. But I'm disappointed that the Board of Police Commissioners wasn't able to be here today, or any of police leadership, to answer questions that we have about their budget request for fiscal year 27. I think it's difficult to review a budget when we don't have them to answer questions about their department's needs. And these are the people who are using that budget. So I don't want to ask you any questions that you can't answer today, but I have a lot of questions, and I'm a little frustrated because I feel like it doesn't matter since we don't have the people, the subject experts here to answer them. I want to talk a little bit about what the police are doing to recruit. We constantly hear about how they don't have enough officers on the street, and yet year after year, their recruiting line item budget has $100,000 budgeted and $0 is spent. In fact, the last time that they spent any money from that was, I think, FY23. So as you were putting together the budget this year, were you in close communication with the police department as you put together the budget for them?
No, I can't really speak to those individual items. It's been an unusual year in that regard. They put together their request in a way that they submitted to their board, and they then submitted it. Now, typically I'd be working with someone like Dave Daniels, and we have conversations and all that. That was somewhat, wasn't available. He was not, while he submitted some more detailed information and sheets, he wasn't available for any discussion about the details and how we got it. So in lacking that, all I was able to do was to ensure that the request matched what the actual board voted on. And so you can see the actual request is in your book, and that's what matched what was there. And that's sort of what I use as my guide for making sure the request was presented accurately. But I don't have any insights into the thinking behind particular line items, other than the detail of the line items themselves.
So, and you had to prepare this budget to meet a certain threshold of spending as required by state law. What was that percentage of general revenue, I believe it was?
Yes, and I'll have to say, as I've said before, the statute wasn't clearly written. The way it's written today is that it said the percent of general revenue would be 23% this calendar year, and 24% next calendar year. Well, the city doesn't operate on a calendar year, so what is it? And so I guess that's anyone's guess. But I do believe that, and I've looked at, and again, the term general revenue is a little bit more expansive than what we would call general fund revenue. But I do believe that we're in excess of what of that amount, whatever it is, that 23, 24, whatever that percentage is. I do believe this budget is in.
I'm glad you mentioned the fiscal year versus the calendar year, because that's just one example how this state law, and I can be a little more liberal with my words, it's sloppy, right? It was clearly written by someone who has no familiarity with how the city operates because he doesn't live here. And it's really frustrating to me that we have to then try to confusingly written law and try to apply it to a very serious matter. Last year when we had the police in front of us, I asked them questions in the context of, I want to make sure you have what you need to go do your job, just like I ask every department that comes in front of us. But this year, I can't really ask them that, and we have costs that we now have to meet up to a certain percentage of our budget. Do we budget any other city department that way?
No.
So it's a weird way to do a budget, because regardless of whether they spend the money that they have or not, we still have to meet a certain threshold. What happens to money that they don't spend? If, say, we budget 24% or 25%, what happens if they don't spend all that? Does it still get, and my understanding is excess funds right now, they get split between the reserve fund and the capital fund. Is that right?
Well, under the city charter, the funds that aren't spent reverts to the general fund balance, or general fund reserves. But under the ordinance, half of that goes to capital, and then half of that would stay in reserves. Now, if you remember last year, what we ended up doing was half went to capital, but the other half was appropriated to tornado effort, so we actually spent it all at the end. It's too early to tell where that's going to go with them. I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar result this year, simply because the tornado effort's still going on, and of course we still have the capital fund, which needs appropriations. But I don't think I can answer that question clearly.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to get an understanding of, this new method we have to work under. To me, we have a lot of departmental needs across our city, and when I see that they can leave funds unspent, especially in like a category like recruiting, which we're always hearing we need more officers, and they just don't spend any money out of the recruiting fund. When I asked about it last year, they just said, oh, we didn't do some of the things we had planned. But they haven't done the things that they've planned for years now. And so I, like a lot of my constituents, care about making sure we have enough police out on the street to do the job. But it's hard for me to think about this when they're not here to answer questions about it. I'm not going to harp on that too much because I know we're all frustrated by it. But a couple more points I want to hit that I think you probably can answer is, let's see. So last year, I rewatched the budget hearing from last year, and their budget guy, whose name I'm forgetting right now, but he said, in terms of transfers in the department, he said, nothing's changed under state control and nothing will change. That's distinctly different from what the police board's lawyer, Chris Graville, said just last week in one of the meetings of the Board of Police Commissioners. But my understanding, and I think this is in the charter as well, those transfers still have to be approved by the Board of E&A. Is that your understanding?
That's correct.
So another conflict with the state law as it's written, and I think we're going to keep coming across this. Like I said, I had a lot of questions prepared here. Suffice to say that the common theme in it all is that if you actually take a close look at the police budget, they routinely do not spend down certain funds. And so it's weird to me that they have excess money this year to rebudget to build a sound wall for their shooting range in South City, which they should have built in the first place, but they were able to move some funds around and allocate extra money, but then we're being told they don't have enough money, and they're actually requesting a huge amount more. Again, I feel this is an existential threat to our city. I hope that this can be worked out in court. I'm not going to belabor the point with you, Mr. Payne, because I really appreciate the work you do. But I think that ultimately it creates distrust between the people and the police who are supposed to be serving the people when we do things this way. I don't think anyone wants that. I hope that the city councilor and the mayor are successful in their lawsuit, because this is a hard thing for us to consider the budget when we have a completely unaccountable, non-transparent police force. And again, I work well with the police in my ward. I work well with the people. I'm not upset with the officers out on the street. I'm upset with one entity and one entity only, and that is the Board of Police Commissioners and their state bosses who think that this is a good way to do things, because it's clearly not. And now we cannot even figure out what they need to do their job because we don't have this transparent process happening. I'm sure you're as frustrated as I am, but I just wanted to say that because I think it's important to note that this year's budget process is extremely different than past years, because we don't have that transparency and that accountability like we're going to have with every other department. So it's going to be a long month. They still have time. They can still come and talk to us. But for now, I'm going to focus on the rest of the budget, and the other departments that we need to fund, because we know there's a lot of good things that our city does. I just think it's a shame that the police think that those other things aren't as important. And so, again, asking for money in far excess of even what they spend every year, even as we struggle to fund things like our building division, our streets department, our forestry division, the things that affect our citizens' daily lives, and also have other aspects of public safety, including our city emergency management agency. Last year, I was able to get money from the police because they were here to talk to us. I was able to work with them, and we were able to rebudget some of their supply money to create an extra position in SEMA. Unfortunately, it was about 2 weeks too late, as that occurred about a couple weeks after the May 16th tornado. But the idea being, as we've already experienced this year, there's a lot more threats coming our way. I can't count the number of times I've already had to take shelter this year. And it's just, again, there's all sorts of aspects of public safety that I think are going unaddressed because we have this state law that has been so poorly written and is frankly unconstitutional. So thank you again. I'll reserve any other questions I have, but I really appreciate it.
Alderwoman Tanya.
Thank you, Chairman. Hello, Director Payne. I'm really appreciative of your work. I feel like I've seen your name more than I ever have since having these discussions, and I'm sure you're not a fan of that because you are a man who likes to do his work and stay out the way. And I know that your name is in a lot of places that it's not commonly. So I just first want to thank you for your work in this process. I'm sure that how long have you been a part of our budget process? How long?
38.
Of all 38 years, I'm sure this has been the most kind of hectic and chaotic and unprecedented year. And so I really appreciate you for the institutional knowledge that you have, for just a consistent, stable hand. And I know that prior to this budget getting to us, you worked with ENA for a while on some of these difficulties. And I know you've been a part of conversations with the Police Board of Commissioners and all of the things that are happening. So I just really want to thank you for your steady hand during these unprecedented times. I think everything about this process feels so unfamiliar, but you do feel familiar to me, so I'm very grateful for that. I know that we have members of the public here and there are folks online, so I really don't want to do too many points. I think Alderman Browning hit on some points. I don't want to be too redundant. I've been very clear to my opposition of state control from the beginning. I think it's important to highlight that there are 2 places in the entire United States of America that do not have control of their police department, and we are one of the 2. And I think it's also really important to be honest about the historical context that the original motivation of the state taking over the police department came from slavery and came from a desire for folks to get more arsenal or weapons for that. And I think that correlates very well to today because I think we are having very real, relevant conversations about policing is for, who should have a say in it and what it means. And it is so interesting having conversations with any other elected official in any other place of the country, and they really don't have much sight or much things to offer because they all live in cities and places where those who are elected by those people, those folks get leadership roles and get to have key roles in shaping how governance works. And so I'm extremely frustrated. I think frustrated is probably the nicest word I could find. Angry might be a better word. I feel that if the state wants to control the police department, they should at least pay for it. And then I would love for us to be able to put all of these dollars to other things and other needs. Our city has a plethora of needs, and I would love to be able to put that there. I think what is ridiculous is not just saying that you want to control it, which is ridiculous, and I think is an attack on autonomy. But I think to say that you want to control it, but you want us to pay for it, I think that is unconstitutional, although it seems like the Constitution doesn't matter much these days, that is unconstitutional. And so I think for you, as far as questions, I am just very curious about whatever you can share in the process of the public so far. I do just want to be appreciative and make sure on the note that I'm very glad that the budget that is in front of us does not it aims to comply with the state statute measure and is trying to find a balance with the many other things. I know that you were present at the ENA Budget Committee where there were hours of testimony and there were residents who were very clear about their desires. I know that there were some changes from the budget, from the public comment that put things into this budget that I think are critical, such as the right to counsel, such as Code Blue, such as many things that I know were not in the original budget. So I just appreciate the work you've done before. I guess the only point of kind of question on the record is, getting back to that half-cent sales tax that is there, that 66% of that has to go to the police department, which equates to about $15.5 million. This amount, does that amount count, is that included or excluded in the percentage that gets us toward meeting our statutory minimum? I know that's a special tax, so I just want to clarify how that works.
That would be included.
Okay. And is there any points in this budget in regards to, are there any non-revenue sources that are being allocated to the police department outside of that special tax?
Outside of that special
Oh,
tax?
sorry, you said that was included, but is there any money that isn't, that we were obligated? I know taxes and not state and federal grants, but is there anything else in our budget?
Yeah, I can't think of any. There are special funds that go to the police department. For instance, part of the gaming fund, part of the public safety. There's another public safety sales tax as well that is allocated to the police. A portion of the use tax fund as well. But all of those are taken into account when we say how much of our local revenues are being allocated to the police department.
Okay. I think I'm going to hold my questions for other departments. We do have members of the public here, and we'll be at this for the next few weeks for, wow, I'll just say, just kind of my final thing on the record here is just, I think there's a lot of concerns, and we're going to hear today a lot of the concerns from the public. And I'm going to say this to you because the police department is not in front of us, but I've had this conversation with folks behind the scenes. I think this conversation happening at the same time as the city is having so many other conversations about other things that are quite controversial, and then also like following what I would say is one of the most brutal protests that I've witnessed in a while that happened at the state of the city with the police department there is really not good, and horrible for public trust. I think not only do I have a concern about us having control of our police department for obviously just fiscal responsibility, basic comments, it's really important as we enter this time kind of as a city where there are a lot of things happening, whether it's at the local, state, federal level. We know that there are going to continue to be protests, and there should, honestly. I think that is a sign of a democracy that does not sleep. And so I'm very concerned at just some of the things that I was able to see very close up myself. I'm not speaking based off of what I read. I'm not speaking based off what I saw. I'm speaking as somebody who was present and who was there. I heard language from officers that were insults and were profanities at protesters. I just saw a level of escalation and aggravation that was not necessary. I engaged in a conversation with the officer myself where I'm like, why are you going back and forth with them? Why are we escalating this situation and we're already at a tense situation? And so I just wanted to make sure that I kind of addressed that and, spoke to that on the record. And I think especially for folks who are watching this at home, we're going to hear public comment. And I just want to encourage us not to bury our heads in the sand and look at this from one perspective, and that there are going to be a lot of residents that have a lot of hesitancies and questions about a police department that is doing, things that are not happening anywhere in the country, that are unusual attacks on autonomy. And then at the same time, the city is considering other issues that are very new, a part of this time. And then at the same time, again, we've had protests here, had protests many times since I've been alder. We've had protests, and I've not seen anything aggravate to that level, honestly, since things were very, very intense in the Michael Brown time. And so there are a lot of just concerns that I would encourage, just as we get into this, public comment and get into the section, that we, keep in mind, and definitely want, members of the public, I think to Alderman Brown's point and what we'll hear from other colleagues, it's like there's a desire from us to make sure that the full city is taken care of, and that we continue to, at the end of the day, represent people and not make decisions on our own. And I think that all these things happening together create a very tense situation, but my hope would be that the people of St. Louis, that we don't become enemies of each other, that we do remember that we are in this together, that we never celebrate experience brutality, that we never celebrate when we see other departments being defunded because of massive acts that are unprecedented from an area. And so I just wanted to make sure that I put that on record, and thank you again for the work that you've done.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Payne, for being here. I'm glad my colleague asked how long you've been working in the department. You said 38 years. Yeah. And out of those 38 years, I think it's good context for people, right, in these conversations, because it has been a very unusual budget year. Of those 38 years, how long have you been budget director?
20.
Okay, so in the 20 years you've been here, this is very unusual. And I think, for all of the folks watching out there, I think there's no doubt that all of us here on budget, and I think at the board, are very concerned about what's happening with the can do, or I mean, or that you're considering and how to balance this, because obviously those costs keep rising, or that you're considering and how to balance this, because obviously those costs keep rising, and
Yeah, that's a good question, but it's a complicated question. I sort of want to defer to the city councilor on that one. I don't think there's any magic solution there other than just being aware that it's and it has an impact. And how we, I mean, if you think about the amount of money we're spending on that, what we could do otherwise with those funds, I would hope that it gives everyone pause to think that it doesn't have to be this way and that we could avoid that. Now, I don't know. From a history standpoint, yeah, I think the awards are going up, and I don't know whether that's a result of the actual cases themselves or whether a different environment we're in or what. But I think whatever it is that it's unfortunate in that, as you know, as a member of this committee, and I know as a budget director, when you're struggling to balance things, how do we find money for this program and that program? And then you say, we have to set aside money for judgments. It doesn't benefit anyone by doing that, simply because you've got limited resources and you're trying to provide services, and that's just another thing that you have to budget for, and it takes away from everyone else. So, I don't really know what that answer is, but I hate to see that continue to increase.
and this might be a question better directed for the city councilor's office, but in the instance, so say we budgeted $10 for judgment this year, right? And we had a $57 million judgment that just came out this year. That was one. How do we pay for when there's a difference in what we've set aside and what the awards are?
Well, historically, again, and I'm thinking history, is that we've managed to, we pay as you go, and we've paid them as they come up, and if we have available funds to pay, then we do, and that we haven't had and I know, like you mentioned, this year we allocated the one-time monies from ARPA interest, and I think at the end of the last fiscal year we also allocated some unspent funds. It's sort of been grabbing funds as they become available to address it. It hasn't been just a regular, other than as I mentioned, we usually appropriate about $6 million a year, 2 for general obligations and 4 for police cases. And we've managed for somehow. I just think it's getting more difficult given the sizes of some of the judgments and some of the activity, the number of the cases. So up to this point we have, although it's getting more difficult, as I said, and so that's why when you see us having up the number in the budget, just shows that it's something to be concerned about, because it's obviously rising to the point where it's going to be as big as one of our smaller departments if we keep it that rate.
Thank you. And I want to say, obviously, we would, at least in my mind, and we want to get to a point where that we don't have incidents that require,
right.
People's rights being violated, that the incidents happen. Just a couple of broader questions. You mentioned that revenue growth is projected at 7%. If that doesn't happen, what are the biggest things? What are the risks that would materialize if we hit that growth projection?
Well, actually, that's a good question. I've been through 4 recessions since over my time here, and it's interesting when you go through that. It's usually that first quarter report. I was reminiscing about the 08-09 recession recently. Typically, when you go through the first quarter, you see some revenues go up, some revenues down, but you're sort of, there's nothing alarming. But I remember 08-09, the recession, I think it may have been FY9, FY10. You immediately knew by looking at the numbers, they were all pointing down. You said, we got to do something. Typically, if it's something like that drastic, those are the kind of things where you all may be involved, where we're reallocating funds or reducing allocations that we've already made. Typically, if it's not, but that was a very unusual, it was a deep recession, survived it. But in a typical scenario, what we would do is we'd be looking toward things that discretionary spending that we could hold on to. This hasn't been pertinent recently simply because we have so many vacancies, but in years past, when we had that, we'd sort of do a hiring freeze where you wouldn't be hiring people if that can. Again, we haven't seen that in a while, but we've got those tools to utilize if it ever comes to pass, and it will. I mean, it's been a while since we've had a big recession. COVID was significant, but it was a steep drop and a steep recovery. But the 08-09 one was very pronounced, and it was very drawn out. And that was, you start identifying what your tools are to address it, and those are some of them.
And it looks like, too, that our reserves are much higher than even the best practice. I mean,
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it, because that is a major improvement where we've been before. In 08-09, I think we actually had, we started on cash. It was like, on a cash base, $18 million, and over 2 fiscal years, it went down by 12. So now you're talking 6. And that's why the rating agencies get nervous, and we all in finance get nervous when you have that. But that's why it's very important to maintain those reserves. It does a number of things. It gets you through those times when we don't have to make drastic decisions. It also, we've been able to avoid having to borrow. We used to borrow, what was called TRANS, which is tax revenue anticipation notes. We used to have to borrow cash because of to manage the cash flow during the year. Well, that was a cost. We don't have to do that anymore. And then we also get interest earnings that we didn't used to get. So all of those, and adding that to our credit stability, those are all positives based on our reserves, being able to build up our reserves.
and I want to ask one question about negatives and decreasing budget. And back to page 12, on the general revenue outlook, the minus 2.3% for other, you may have described what the other is, but could you?
Yes, yeah. The other is mostly transfers into the fund. One of those happens to be telecom tax receipts, and that's been declining over time. Particularly, no one has a landline anymore, and those type of things where revenue's sort of been declining. And I've got that to continue, and that's one of the ones that got marked down.
Thank you. And just one more question. Well, it's probably serious questions, but just about pension. I know that Alderman Browning mentioned it as a concern. I think you've voiced it as concerns over just since I've been here. So can you just talk about, it sounds like 80%, even though it seems, just from what I've read, that's actually a healthy number. I mean, but can you talk about what you would assess the risk number for, or the risk percentage, the unfunded liability part?
The unfunded liability. Yeah, like I said, if you look at a system, most of them say if you're over 80% funded, you're relatively well funded. But there's a cost associated with that. And then the critical, those who criticize that level basically say, oh, well, but your assumptions are too generous, and oftentimes they are, in terms of two things. What's your rate of return?
And what's ours? What do you?
7% in the ERS. Most of them are using 7. I think FRS, which is frozen, I think is 6.75. So they should be more conservative because that one's going to come to an end at some point. But what others don't realize is that not only are you basing your returns on that level, but it's also discounting your liabilities. So the higher that discount number, the more it understates what your liabilities are. And if you see those who criticize pension systems say they're overstating their returns, but they're also understating the liabilities based on the rate they assume. And you can argue that a bit. I know the rating agencies take that into account. They'll use their own in order to get apples to apples among cities and all. They use their own. But I've looked at, when you look at other cities, they thank God we're not Chicago, where you're in the 20s and that kind of thing. But I think the bigger challenge has been that it's very expensive. If you look at that other graphic, we're spending $104 million out of this budget on pension costs. And particularly where you have difficulty in hiring folks, this is across the board in salaries, and I know we're trying to address some of that. I often ask, I had a conversation a number of years ago with personnel, and I was saying, well, how can we address pensions? If we could address pensions, we could address salaries, and because we're spending all these things on all these other benefits, and most people say, well, when you're recruiting, they don't care about the other benefits. Well, why are we spending all these millions of dollars on them? If the focus is going to be on starting pay and everyone's focused on salaries, we really need to address it from a holistic approach where you're looking at your total compensation and say, all right, well, maybe, for instance, maybe ERS could be a contributory system, maybe other changes that we can make, and that would free up funds to address the salary issue as more people put more importance on the salary piece as opposed to the benefit piece, and that's something that could be looked at. But yeah, I from a funding standpoint, I think we are, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a dire situation from a pension system because we are 80% or so, but the cost is extremely high, and it precludes us from addressing some of those salary issues that you hear about all the time.
Are there any cities that are models for what you've just described at maybe looking at having those conversations about adjusting the total compensation package to increase salaries?
It's funny. I looked at a number, I've seen Kansas City's. From a pension standpoint, it's funny because I've got some illustrations. Actually, I posted it on our website. Total compensation costs, not just pension, but everything. And I haven't seen something like that similar from cities. I might be able to go into an actuarial report and spot where they're spending on holiday pay or vacation pay or sick leave or all those all in one spot. It's difficult to get a uniform. Actually, I asked that of the Evergreen people who were doing the pay study. They got a little bit of information, particularly with pensions, because pensions is one of the largest ones. But the other ones were more elusive, and they didn't provide any sort of comprehensive look.
Thank you. No, it's a complicated issue. You don't want to, you want to make the city attractive to work for.
Right.
And part of it is the benefits.
Right.
But how do you balance it as we try and, grow and modernize and all those things? So I have no other questions for you, Mr. Payne. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for answering all our questions.
Sure.
Alderman Devoti.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Payne. Every time I listen to you, I learn something new, and it's always an experience, so thank you. The Alderwoman asked some fascinating questions. As the dad of two young adults who have recently entered the workforce, I'll tell you my observation is they're most interested in what are you going to pay me today versus what a retirement or a pension benefit might be in 25 or 30 years. Show me the money now. That's my observation. She also asked an interesting question with respect to forecasting and what if things don't turn out as well as we hope. You talked in terms of how important first quarter observations tend to be. Do you have information back for first quarter 2026, and how does the forecast look for the remainder of the calendar year?
Actually, yeah, we post that first quarter as well as the second quarter on the website, so that report's there. The first quarter was it looked within budget. It looked like a little over budget, perhaps. I think, and the second quarter was a little more so. Usually, when you look at your taxes, you'll get reports. Earnings, I usually gets information from the earnings and payroll tax from the Collector of Revenue's office. Sales tax comes from their state reports, and those are on a monthly basis. So they're pretty consistent, and it's good. I will caution that I do remember a number where you get a good report in the third quarter, and things looking good. So, and that the third quarter is actually a crucial one because that's the final one before presenting the budget and doing that. And then the fourth quarter goes, you shoot craps on, and you end up with a base that's lower than what you're estimating for next year. And then it's the other way around too. I've also seen weak third quarters where you're cutting back, and then all of a sudden, fourth quarter outperforms, and your base is, your projected revenue is actually less than what you ended the prior year. So I think it's important. I also think it's important to have those tools that I mentioned, Alderwoman Velasquez, in the ready in case that happens. Again, they haven't used many of those recently, but I don't. When we went through the COVID process, that was severe, but again, as I said, short. But if you don't remember, when I did the budget that time, we had a whole big page of contingencies that said, if this goes south further, here's what we can pull. Now, none of them, I guarantee you no one in this room would like that. I mean, would have liked to have seen some of that stuff, but it's the kind of thing you have to identify as potential tools to use when things go south.
I appreciate that. I guess the fact that we have your proposed budget in front of us, that tells us what you think of the current forecast and how confident we should or should not be. Is that fair?
Yes.
I do want to make a comment. I have the impression that our discussions over the next 2.5 weeks will be dominated by this request from the Board of Police Commissioners with respect to their budget. I just want to make a couple of observations as someone who has had a litigation practice, a trial practice for the last 28 years, in which I have brought a number of cases against various municipal police departments, including the city of St. Louis. As disappointed as we might be that nobody is here today, nor will they be here over the next 2.5 weeks, no matter what we think of the job that Chris Greville is doing as a lawyer, there is not a lawyer worth his salt who would ever let the chief of police or any member of the Board of Police Commissioners appear in front of this committee, be sworn in while that litigation is going on. So for the sake of having fruitful discussions over the next 2.5 weeks, I know we've all said what we have to say, but let's move on, because the man wouldn't be doing his job if any of those folks would be appearing here. So we're wasting our breath, and we're merely playing to the public when we go on those diatribes. That's my 2 cents. I would also, though, and for those who have talked to me about the state statute, I actually think that Alderman Browning was being kind when he called the legislation sloppy. It is sloppy, without a doubt. It was haphazard. It was pushed way too quickly. Very few people asked the questions that they should have asked, and we have seen the result of that on a number of different fronts over the last 3 or 4 months. I would point out, and I think he made reference, that the bill sponsor in the House, Brad Criss, Representative Criss, doesn't represent a soul who resides in the city of St. Louis. More specifically, he's in southwest St. Louis County. The sponsor of the legislation on the Senate side doesn't represent a soul who lives in the city of St. Louis, which then gets to the problematic aspect underlying the meaning behind the position that we're in here today. I agree, it's very, very problematic. But for the sake of our discussion, our budget discussion, let's talk about what the state statute requires. And I understand it's being challenged. I get that. But right now we're functioning under it. And you made reference to the statute, the requirement to spend in this calendar year 23% general revenue. I know, Director, we have talked today, or you have talked today, about general fund revenue. From your perspective as a finance guy, can you explain to us how you have tried to mesh those two terms? Because to be clear, The state statute does not define general revenue, correct?
Correct.
Yes. So from your perspective, can you educate us on how you have best tried to think in terms of general revenue when we talk in terms of general fund revenue?
No, I'm sorry, you confused me. So, but you're talking about general fund as we know it in this budget?
Correct.
Okay, the general fund as we know it in this budget is that when we talk about those revenues specifically that are not allocated for a specific purpose. So earnings tax, for instance, our largest individual source of revenue. There is no ordinance that says thou shalt spend the earnings tax on this service or that service. It's just for municipal operations in general. Let's contrast that to the use tax, which has a number of ordinances, I believe, that have, say, you shall allocate $5 million for health care services, $5 million for affordable housing, $3 million for building demo, and the rest is excess use tax for. So the distinction there is how we, or how the city sets aside these funds, and it may be state statute, and there's statutory, for instance, the half-cent capital sales tax authorized by state statute. It has to be spent on capital, so that's part of the capital fund. And there are specific, all the various funds usually have some statutory ordinance authority behind it. The general fund as we know it, and Fund 1000 specifically in this budget book, are revenues that don't have that designation. It's mostly for general operations.
And is it fair to say that the general fund, as we know it, is essentially consistent with how the Missouri Budget Office describes general revenue? In that general revenue is that revenue that is not allocated for a specific purpose.
Yeah, I can't.
I'm asking you to go outside.
Yeah.
I get it. In any event, when we look at our $1.4 billion budget, and I'm looking at page 2 of your presentation, those items that you have listed, starting with general fund through internal service funds, is it fair to say that that the number connected with general fund is the only portion not allocated for specific purposes?
Yes.
In other words, when we talk about specific revenue, grant funds, debt service funds,
Right.
capital improvement funds,
Right.
enterprise funds,
That's correct.
internal service funds, those are all items that are specifically dedicated for a specific purpose, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then when we talk about numbers, and I'm looking at page 30, my eyes aren't that good, 305 of our booklet that we got this morning. If we look at the last column under fiscal year 27 budget proposal, the number proposed for the police department is just over 159 million. Is that correct?
Right.
And that would amount, if we're just doing simple math, 26% of our general fund. Is that fair?
I'd have to do the calculation, but I assume you.
I did it. I'm not trying to mislead you, but
Yeah.
I mean, while you were talking here today. And in any event, again, when we talk, and I think you mentioned earlier, it is your belief that we have met the statutory obligation set forth by Missouri statute, right?
Correct.
And would it be fair to say that if the budget proposed by this body that would be approved by ENA and signed by the mayor, if it came back at 26% of general fund, that would in fact comply with, mean that we met our statutory obligations?
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that, based on those items which they're trying to exclude in this statute and all of that. I don't really want to get into the statutory discussion, but I can tell you from their perspective, they take the statute and say, but you can't count retirement costs, and you can't count this, and it gets a lot more complicated than.
Well, I won't ask you the money question then, but I will ask you this. Is it fair to say that if a budget allocating $159 million is approved, that would amount to 26% of the general fund for fiscal year 27?
Well, I mean, yeah, again, without me doing the actual calculation, I'm assuming you've done it. If that's just the percentage of our $637 million, if that's the simple math question.
Good. Thank you. No, nothing else.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Director, for being here. A couple questions, and we'll jump into public comment. Going back to your presentation, so can you talk a little bit of what the problem with the marijuana sales tax of, we thought we was gonna have this big boom with the sales tax. I know we passed or legislation that I sponsored to kind of extend the hours, like, oh, we extended them competing with St. County. I mean, more money is going to come in. What has been that slow growth to that?
Yeah, it's sort of been a head scratcher because I remember when we first estimated, and I believe we knew what the state market would be, and we're thinking, oh, well, maybe we capture 8% of that. And our estimate that year was $2.2 million. And then in actuality, it came in at 1.7. So I said, all right, well, it came in at 1.7, so it was short. So let's assume that we're going to repeat that performance in the current fiscal year. So that was the estimate for this fiscal year. And now it's coming in at 1.4. So the only thing and again, this is collected by the state and it's remitted to the city from the state collector of revenue. So the only thing I can surmise from that, and just from reading the stories on it, is that there's a portion of the market that's not getting captured in the sales. It just doesn't make sense that that would be that small of a market. And I know there's been talk, at least at the state level, that they're cracking down on unregulated sales that are, in effect, you're selling marijuana in a different form to what that's not subject to the 3% that we're supposed to be collecting. And I can only, again, I don't have numbers and details behind that, but I can only surmise that a portion of the market's being lost there. So if that's addressed, and I think they are addressing it, it'll be interesting to see how our revenues perform next fiscal year.
Gotcha. A couple questions on the police budget. I have a comment after, but I want to get to the questions first. I do know there's a big difference between the capital asset of what the department asked for compared to what we proposed. Are those numbers, they look to be very inflated from previous years. I think this year they're asking for they were asking for $21,431,000. In previous years, they only received roughly $2.1 million, $4.4 million, and $3.1 million, and then a huge jump of what they're asking for of this year of 21.4, and it looked like we, gave them about 3.1 in the same amount from previous years. I know you can't necessarily think for the board, but was there conversations of thought behind that amount?
Other than the fact that the request was higher than we could actually fit into the budget. I think it was trying to continue to appropriate what they had received on the same level previously.
But previously, it looked like they received
3.2.
Yeah, 3.2.
Which is what we recommended for next year.
And then they asked for at least this year 21.4.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty hefty increase. In order to accommodate that, you'd have to cut something significant out of somewhere else.
Gotcha. Also, I noticed, because in the police department budget, I think is important, it's just not police that they are over. The police department's over also the marshals here at City Hall. They're over the park rangers. And in their budget, it looks like they tried to zero out the park rangers.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too. They didn't request. They didn't request it. I don't. There was some talk where they said, "Oh, we're going to put that in an internal service fund and charge you." But that was not in the official request. But if, under the statute, those are their police department employees, so we budgeted them where they have been and where they continue to be today. And so we wanted to make sure the budget reflected that, as well as the funding for the city marshals.
Correct. So you're not, I think we've at least had the privilege of serving on this committee for the last few years to kind of understand it a little bit more. So when you say they didn't make the request, ideally, were like salaries, overtime, none of that being in there would not be, I guess, did they have requests for FTEs for that position or those positions? So it looked like no FTEs, no money. You would be scrapping the park rangers
Right.
of what they were looking to potentially
Yeah,
do. I know you can't speak for them, but just off what
Yeah,
was.
I can say that there was this concept on them, I believe, where there was, we'll create our own internal service fund and charge the city for these services, which doesn't particularly make sense because they are their own employees. But they didn't actually request that in their request. If you look to what was actually submitted in the request, it was specifically what you see before you in the book. So there was no funding in the general revenue for the park rangers and only a portion of the marshals. And the budget, what the budget does is proposes that those be funded in full, both units.
Mm-hmm. And that was going to be my other question. Going to the marshals, I see there was a huge significant cut to salaries, therefore meaning that half of the marshals will be laid off. I have my opinion on some of the actions that took place during the mayor's state of the city where the marshals were involved, and I think that over aggression that the police also was part of. But at the same time, the marshals do serve a service to make sure that people are checked at the front and side and make sure that go through the metal detectors. In the climate that we're living in, where people may not like the decisions of even just saying certain stuff about either the police department or certain policies passed, it looks as if the police department was going to significantly cut, I would say, a safety element that not only keeps citizens safe, but elected officials, building commissioners, just staff at City Hall. It wasn't the same amount requested historically than they requested in the past. And would you say that mean that there would have been a salary cut from?
Yeah, I can't, because their official request doesn't reflect what they were talking about in terms of setting up some special internal service fund. I don't know exactly how they thought that was going to work, but when I saw it evaluated, I say, look, this is not how it's supposed to work. It's supposed to fully, and which is the same approach it took to some of those retirement accounts that they didn't include in their budget as well. I mean, those are things that we need to appropriate, regardless of whether or not they're part of the equation or not.
Gotcha. I would say, like most of my colleagues, I'll end with this. Like most of my colleagues, I'm also very disappointed not to have members of the Police Commission Board here or the department itself. I personally reached out to try to have them in front of this committee. At the end of the day, the public safety budget alone, I think, makes up over like 51% of the budget. And within that public safety, police make up 46% of that budget. And while I hear my colleague from the 5th that pending litigation is probably not smart for them to come, I think also you're named in kind of that pending litigation, and you're standing right here in front of us talking about things that the police department do not want or believe that the decisions you made after doing this for 38 years of the city, 20 years of being on the budget director, you still came in front of this board and disagree that we should not be asking questions or not be upset, because majority of our constituents are also not only concerned, they're also frustrated. And when you have a department that decides not to show up and not be transparent and not be held accountable, the conversations that I had with the commissioner was, even if you didn't want to present what the city presented to you, you could have still presented your budget. so that people can get an understanding of why, going back to the capital, some of the capital needs, why are you asking for almost 100% increase in that department? I echo everything that the alderman from the 9th said about the state takeover bill being sloppy. I'm not, shocked that you have, in my opinion, MAGA extreme Republicans. This isn't anything new, trying to dictate the way that the city of St. Louis not only governed, but the way that we have input on policies here. If it was shooting back minimum wage when people in the city of St. Louis said they want it, or pushing back state control when we said it very clear that we want local control. And now we're in this limbo of what the actual policy means. Our fiscal year is not the same as the state. Their fiscal year runs from January to May. Ours run from July to June. It's not clear what, I think it's clear to us what general revenue is, but when you have Jefferson City also saying that Rams money is part of the general revenue and all these other funds, I'm glad that people will be here talking about it. I'm also applaud my colleagues that did raise their concerns about what the police commission is doing by not being in front of us. Regardless of any pending lawsuit, I think we also have a role and obligation to represent our constituents, and the majority of those are just as concerned. As the alderman from the 9th said, not because they don't work with law enforcement, but because we're talking about a commission, people who do not have the 38 years of experience like yourself and know how to govern and balance a budget, which will, if we took their budget, would be a huge impact on other things. That public safety is not just police. Public safety is our building division. Public safety is our health department. Public safety is making sure our streets are safe. So ultimately, thank you for being here, Director Payne. Thank you for stepping in kind of a gap with the police department. As the alderwoman from the 6th said, the invitation still stands. Like she said, this was a choice they made, regardless of litigation or not. This is a choice that they made not to show up. I continue to have an open door policy from this budget committee. I will be following back up with them to request that they at least present their budget, because again, you're part of the litigation and you're here presenting the city budget. So it's critical to make sure that the largest department that's asking for city money, that's taxpayer dollars money, at least can show up and explain why they believe their budget is better than the one you presented. So with that, I have no further questions. Thank you for being here, and we can jump into public testimony. If you are here to speak, make sure you sign up. There's also coffee and donuts here for folks if you're getting a little hungry, such as the baby over here who probably wanted the most. If you are online, do we have any people online, Madam Clerk?
I do. I do not see any hands raised at the time.
If you're online, you can raise your hand so that we can move you over to speak. And we'll take a little second to get as many people over, and then the folks that are online, we will all have you raise your hand and come off screen, and then the people in the room that's speaking will raise your hand. Swear everybody in at one time.
So far online, I have 2. Did you want to begin?
Yep. If you're online, I see one person camera is on. If you could just raise your hand, and for the person that's on, just be careful. I see as you're driving, we always encourage like pulling over, but that's only for board members, but just for safety. For the folks online, if you could raise your right hand, and for the people in the room, if you could raise your hand. And do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. All right, we will start in the room and then we will go online.
First, we have Mark Orahula.
All right. And for everybody in the room, you'll have 3 minutes if you just say your first and last name, the ward you reside in, and then you may proceed after that.
Good morning. My name is Mark Orihuela, and I live in Ward 9, and I'm here to urge the Budget and Public Employees Committee to reject the proposed police budget. First, I want to acknowledge that this is not the original proposal from the Board of Police Commissioners. The Board of E&A has worked to reduce the budget to $208.6 million, and I appreciate that effort. But even at that level, the city is still allocating tens of millions more than what it has said in its own lawsuit is legally required, about $184.2 million. At a time when critical programs are underfunded, that gap matters. As someone who works in the drug treatment court, which is a diversion program, I see every day that real public safety comes from stability, housing, treatment, and prevention, not just enforcement after the fact. Last winter, Code Blue saved the lives of hundreds of unhoused St. Louisans during the freezing temperatures. Yet the current budget only allocates less than 60% of what that program received. Take the Office of Violence Prevention as another example. Police don't prevent crime, they respond to it after it's already happened. The Office of Violence Prevention does critical work in addressing the underlying reasons behind crime. Yet their allocation for fiscal year 27 is only 8.8 of the 12.9 million that they request, despite doing the work that actually reduces violence and makes our community safer. And Right to Counsel, which provides legal representation to tenants facing eviction and keeps families housed, is only receiving about 40% of what it requested. These programs reduce harm before it happens, and they make our community safer in ways policing alone cannot. Finally, as the son of immigrants, I am deeply concerned about how increased police funding will impact the immigrant community. In our region, 82% of people detained by ICE were detained after an interaction with police, and 90% of those stops were traffic-related. Although SLMPD denies collaboration with ICE, 2 weeks ago, an officer called a community rapid response line, mistakenly thinking it was an ICE hotline. More funding for the police means more stops, more surveillance, and more harm to vulnerable communities. We should not be funding the police beyond what is required while cutting programs that save lives and prevent violence. Please do right by St. Louis and reject this budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have online Alicia, and in opposition. Are you in opposition or not determined? Mr. Nate Lindsay,
We're gonna go online. He's in the room.
online?
One.
That's Nate, he's in person. Chairman wants you to go to somebody online.
Okay. Online, we have Alicia Hernandez.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, good afternoon, committee members. My name is Alicia Hernandez. I am the Advocacy Director for the Migrant and Immigrant Community Action Project. Our office is located in Ward 7. I'm also a ward neighborhood. We are asking the Budget and Public Employees Committee and the full Board of Aldermen to add no additional funding over what is legally required for SLMPD and to give that money to the people of St. Louis City. And that looks like fully funding Right to Counsel, allocating the full request toward the Office of Violence Prevention. You know, right now in our country, we are experiencing unprecedented expansion of the immigration detention system. And in our region, you all continue to hear that what it looks like here is that the main way that people are put into ICE custody and into detention and deportation is through interaction with police. That looks like racial profiling, police making unnecessary traffic stops that escalate to arrest. And as you heard Mark just say, I'm going to say it one more time, 82% of people in our region are detained after an interaction with police. And again, that is racial profiling. And you also have heard several times that while SLMPD states that there is no collaboration with ICE, last month, an SLMPD officer called our community rapid response line to report someone, mistaking it for the ICE hotline through DHS. This simple mistake made it very clear that there is, in fact, police cooperation through SLMPD. With the massive influx of funding to the police, there will be more unnecessary patrols and surveillance that will lead to the detention and deportation of our neighbors. You know, authoritarianism is rapidly reshaping our country. and has been creeping for a very long time. And as folks have said, the state takeover of our police department is a direct impact of that. So thank you to Alderwoman Sunier for raising the unnecessary violence at the hands of SLMPD at City Hall last month. SLMPD has a clear history of violence and brutality, and their actions become more and more violent the harder that we, the people of St. Louis City, fight for a city that prioritizes people over policing and people over profit. And thank you to the alders who have noted that it is egregious that the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department will not present their budget request before the board, regardless of if you think the reason for it or not is a legal tactic. You are not wasting your breath. You are instead voicing a shared concern of those you were elected to represent. You've heard from countless community members, and will continue to hear from community members and organizations where we need and where we want city funding. Tornado Recovery, Code Blue, Right to Counsel, Office of Violence Prevention. The MICA project adds our support to these calls because these same services and offices benefits immigrants and mixed status residents of St. Louis. And we reject any additional funding to policing in our city. And my personal question for you all is, why do we continue to give SLMPD so much power, so much money? There is a better way forward. You know, police and ICE are not separate. They are similar. Yeah, we need a way that prioritizes building community, not cages, keeps our families together. We want a St. Louis city that prioritizes language needs, other needs of immigrant residents through all of these services and offices. Yeah, we want a St. Louis city where immigrant families feel safe and our neighbors can thrive. And that means no more money for police. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Nate Lindsay.
Thank you, Chair Aldridge, members of the committee. My name is Nate Lindsay. I serve as counsel for Dutchtown, which operates one of the city's most effective neighborhood-led vacancy abatement programs. In Dutchtown, one of the city's few majority-minority neighborhoods on the south side, we've closed over 40 targeted vacancy cases to new occupancy or pending rehabilitation. We have a pipeline of over 150 affordable housing units in active production with our mission-driven partners. That work is only possible because Dutchtown has stitched together a partnership focused on vacancy housing production. This is something the city has failed to do at scale. This budget continues that failure by taking no recommended steps forward on the vacancy collaboratives from Policy to Progress report funded by the city. The report makes the building division's structural failures impossible to ignore. The division has 0 full-time inspectors dedicated to vacant property enforcement and 0 full-time staff dedicated to recovering the city's uncollected vacancy fees, estimated now at over $20 million. This vacancy problem doesn't touch the building division's demonstrative failure to oversee the quality of rental housing in our city, with results ranging from lead and mold exposure to the exploitation of new Americans in St. Louis. Do the tools to fix these problems exist? Yes. Has the city dedicated the resource capacity to use them? No. The building division budget is flat at best. It should come as no surprise that the building division, that has been in front of this body to tell you it cannot perform its basic function at current staffing level, has seen multiple allegations of fraud and a recent indictment that eviscerated an otherwise useful private property stabilization tool. Fraud as a symptom of our failures cannot be an excuse for taking action. This year in Dutchtown, we targeted 3 vacancy cases that burned to the ground prior to being resolved because the building division couldn't timely secure. The city will not collect $1 in fees from those absentee property owners, as those lots likely fall to the LRA and the city ends up paying for the demolition cost. This is the normal pattern across St. Louis, both north and south, repeated for decades, paying twice for lack of enforcement. The tornado proved this at scale. Total cleanup falling on the city and state is now estimated at $180 million because 80% of privately held properties would not qualify for FEMA money because they were previously causing displacement than one balancing on a knife's edge like Dutchtown. In 2024, Black buyers represented nearly 1 in 5 mortgages generated in Dutchtown. That's more than double their share citywide. This is a direct result of deliberate vacancy abatement and housing strategies that pulled properties out of speculation and positioned them for equitable wealth building. But that opportunity is fragile. Concentrated vacancy turns an accessible market into an uninvestable one. When buildings sit, decay, burn, lenders pull back, comparable sales collapse, and the homes that families tried to build wealth in no longer create wealth. When the market hits rock bottom, capitalism will act against low-income homeowners who do not have the means to compete in a buyer's market. This is the threat the North Side faces today. Every building division decision this city funds or fails to fund either protects equitable wealth building in those neighborhoods or accelerates their destruction. Your current budget staffing cuts in this very division, which is identified as the bottleneck for growth in the city of St. Louis, demonstrate that you are not prioritizing this issue. The current city plan is fund for demolition and fail to fund for growth. That's where we are at. Fund full-time vacancy inspectors, fund full-time collection staff, and please fund the building division.
Thank you. Next, we have online Donnie Khan.
Hi, I'm still driving, but I'm on my way to City Hall to testify in person. I'll be there in a few minutes.
Next, we have Julian Holt.
Hey, hello. My name is Julian Holt. Excuse me, my voice is a bit gone. I was at the May Day rally. But I'm a resident of Ward 12, and I've just been listening to everything that everybody's been saying and trying to compartmentalize everything. And honestly, after everything I've heard, I'm pretty disheartened. I'm pretty saddened. This is, even if it's in suits, this is violence. This is what I'm hearing. None of the budget addresses public safety accurately, because if we actually really cared about the people's safety, we wouldn't be funding the police. We would be funding more social things that can help people on the ground level, things like Code Blue. You want to keep people out of crime. You need to keep people out of poverty. You need to keep people off of the street. And the Code Blue is something that helps keep people off of the street. You need to fund things like the right to counsel, which helps people who have evictions, who keep them off the street as well. Poverty is always the #1 reason there is crime, period, point blank. And the police are not designed to address that. That's the thing that gets lost in meetings like this and in conversations like this. The police's job is not to protect us, period. Their job is to protect capital. That has always been their job since the very beginning, and it will never change. So when I hear things like the police board isn't here because of litigation, that's not weird, like you said, or unusual, like you said. It makes sense to me because they're not here for us. They don't care about us. They're not worried about the police budget getting cut because they know they're going to get what they want. They don't really care about whether or not they're here and hearing the things that people have to say, the concerns. They don't care because that's not their job. Their job is to protect money, which is why you said they're in litigation. They only care about the capital they can lose. Also, if we really wanted to curtail any things that can happen with the police, we would talk more about the Civilian Oversight Board that's been routinely neglected. They can't even look at cases that were already completed, let alone cases that are underway in prisons, on the streets. If we really wanted to address the issues, it goes far beyond the police budget. And so when I hear that the police is taking over from the state and we're one of the only 2 cities, it's not confusing to me. It's not astounding or befuddling to me. It makes sense because in St. Louis, we've been putting in work. A lot of activists, a lot of orgs, a lot of volunteers, a lot of laborers, working class. We've been talking, we've been working, we've been moving, and they notice that. They're scared of that. So yeah, of course the police board isn't here. That makes sense. Why would they want to be here? They don't want to be with the people that they're made to oppress. They don't want to be here and listen to us. I would also say too, hold on, I took a lot of notes. I'm sorry, a lot of this is a bit just jumbled and all over the place. But honestly, I think that the thing that really needs to be understood is that this whole budget is just one of the most violent things I've ever witnessed, period, like in person. Because the police inflating their budget while people are still on their front lines in North City. I'm in Ward 12. I'm in Penrose. I see this firsthand. I saw the tornado. I was there. I got lifted off the ground and thrown into a tree. I know. But seeing that the response to that only came from the volunteers, seeing that while people were trying to administer food and supplies and all types of different things to people across the region that were having issues, the police were over there and Aldi's protecting the mayor and any other politics that were over. They don't really care about the people on the ground level. And that's gonna never change. And so when I hear this budget, I'm here, and I'm pretty sure there are gonna be other people who follow me that understand that none of this stuff means absolutely anything until the money is funded for the people's needs, until the money is administered to the people who help fund all of the police. You mentioned litigation. If I get a lawsuit, call my boss and say, well, I ain't coming into work, they're gonna fire me. If I am their boss, my taxes pay for them. So they need to be here. They have to be here. And even if they aren't here, again, that doesn't matter because their job is never gonna change. They're violent, they're gonna always remain violent, and it is up to the people to save ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Helen Bailey.
Helen Bailey, 3rd Precinct, 11th Ward. In 2021, the Board of Aldermen was reduced by 50%. This was based on the 2020 census and due to significant population decline, and we went from 28 representatives to 14. Yet we've continued to staff and fund the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department as though the city still boasts 800,000 residents. What additional benefit could 300 additional officers bring to the most murderous police department in the entirety of the United States? Our tax dollars fund this city. 65% of the general budget comes from our income taxes. Our taxes fund the murder of civilians on the street and in the City Misjustice Center. With our taxes, we fund the Real-Time Crime Center, the citywide audio surveillance, extended overtime, flock cameras, tanks, Humvees. The citizens of this city deserve a study of the effectiveness of the police department in each of our 79 neighborhoods and an audit to provide the taxpayers with transparency and knowledge of where their money is going. This city could choose to operate like a hospital and require police officers to carry individual liability insurance like doctors to cut down on contributions at the city level to lawsuits. While we do have more police per capita than every other city in this nation, we also boast more parks than many other cities. Between 108 and 110 parks grace the landscape of our beautiful city. At the last opportunity for testimony, many testified that the preventative programs funded during this current fiscal year and defunded for the next fiscal year could be funded for pennies on the dollar compared to the unwarranted, unmerited additional $30+ million the budget has allocated for policing for this upcoming fiscal year. So I'm adding the Board of Public Service to the rallying cry, especially since we learned today that the police department has planned to zero out the funding for marshals in our parks. It's time to reinvest in the human infrastructure of this city. Section 14B of the city charter gives the BPS purview over the Parks and Recreation Division. Our recreation centers provide supervision and natural mentors for youth. When the city was running well, the city rec staff went out into communities, they worked with seniors, they provided service learning and literacy training, as well as introductions to Olympic sports like swimming, basketball, and boxing. There's a reason Jason Tatum comes back to this city to highlight Wohl Recreation Center, and it's because the Recreation Center was pivotal to his success as an individual and an athlete. Well-funded recreation centers give youth opportunities to stay active, build confidence, and build skills that lead to scholarships and improved life expectancies. I'm here to urge you to reject the police budget and fund programming that works. Free the land held captive by the LRA and nefarious unchecked property owners. Free those enslaved at the CJC. Fund a resident-led redevelopment in North St. Louis invest in our children and the positive, successful future of our city. Thank you.
Next, we have Caitlin, is it Kilgo?
Hello, my name is Caitlin Kilgo. I'm a very proud resident of the 7th Ward. I'm grateful to live in this beautiful city. And I'm not an expert on budgets. I'm not an accountant. I did not have time to read the full Les Mis size document. It would probably take me a lot longer to get through it. So I wanted to focus on one small part that I could understand. A 7% raise for the police is just a chunk of this insane budget. We know that the police cause violence and they cause harm. I just want to say, like, a 7% raise for the men who bruised me, who sprained my wrist, who sent me to the hospital, a 7% raise when children in our city, 1 in 3 children in St. Louis goes to bed hungry every night. One of my heroes taught me that budgets are moral documents. And I think you'll have an opportunity here. Well, first, let me backtrack. I heard from a lot of you saying this is unusual, this is unprecedented, this is a violation of our Constitution for the police board of commissioners to be asking for this money. And then they're not here and they don't talk about why they even need this money. So it's very obvious they have zero respect for any of us at all. Not the citizens, not our elected officials, not the law, not the city charter. So why is there still $208 million going to the police? Fund what works. We know that the police do not keep us safe. We know this. The stats, everything is there. All of the information is there. The police do not respect us. We should not have respect for them. We should not be giving them any money. So I challenge you, go to the extreme. If they're not respecting our city charter and our Constitution and the United States Constitution, do not respect their laws, do not respect their requests, zero out their budget. Make them come and defend why they need money when they are the most murderous police department in the nation. Stop giving them raises for murdering our neighbors. Zero out the budget. Be revolutionary. Do something different. Thank you.
Ms. Kilgo, thank you. What ward are you from, Ms. Kilgo? Thank you. Next, we have Torin Taylor, or is it Taylor or Taylon?
Torin Taylor, resident of the 7th Ward, and I just have a lot of questions. I hate to see that the guy that runs the budget left out of here, but I just wanted to know why, like the last person just said, you cannot zero out the budget. Challenge them, you know? I feel like the police do so many things to not only me, but a lot of people that I know, including pulling people over for unnecessary traffic stops, just the whole culmination of things that you already know about. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, beyond zeroing out the budget, also telling them, you know, since you can't show up to these board meetings, how about we take away some of the things that you already have? Like the new buildings that they have all throughout the city, all their new vehicles, all their new armory, all those are things that the city can confiscate, right? Those are things that you, the city government, control, essentially. The people say that we don't want them to have any more money And we also don't want them to keep being armed to keep terrorizing us, right? Just a few weeks ago, we had a alleged bomb threat at a building across the street from us where police blocked off Jefferson from Cherokee and Utah and had bomb squad right outside my house. And along with that, they had officers with AR-15s. What are you doing at a alleged bomb threat with military hardware? Right? Like, that is sickening and disheartening. And the fact that the mayor and the board of A&E are not here to also partake in these conversations with the people is very disgusting. So I would not only like to see you all challenge the police, but challenge the Board of Police Commissioners and the Board of A&E in saying enough is enough. The people run this city. Y'all just sit there and look cute at the top of the food chain. It's time that we knock them down a couple notches and show them who really runs this city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Etta Taylor.
Hi. I'm Etta Taylor. I live in Ward 7. I'm opposed to this budget. A lot of it is being opposed to this giant police budget that we don't know where the money's going because they won't tell us, they won't talk to us. Basically all the reasons everyone stated. I'm going to try to keep this brief because my nerves are kind of shaky, but yeah, the police aren't helping us. We don't need to budget for them not telling us what they're going to do. That's probably going to ultimately harm the citizens of the city. I also think that we really need to fully fund right to counsel. I know that last year it had about $400,000. Then I heard today that they said they increased it by $1 million that had only been allocated to $1 million, though it had passed at $2.5 million. So I think that we should pass it because I know personally that good landlords make good tenants and bad landlords make, you know, not only more crime and all sorts of issues, but they also make it harder for good landlords. If a good landlord moves in after a bad landlord, I was a handy person for most of the last 20 years. I had my own business for the last 5. So much of it is just watching, you know, a good landlord finally gets a building, but because the last landlord just did quick fix, what was supposed to be a turnkey opportunity ends up being hundreds of thousands of dollars of repairs that need to be made that were never fully addressed. And the tenants and the landlords and everybody gets stuck in a bad position. So I think that, like, you know, we really need to help support tenants because it is supporting good landlords. And it's supporting not needing so much money for police because, again, it's the not having money on the street, or not money on the street, not having people on the street, making sure that people have secure housing. Secure housing means everything to everyone. And I'm going to stop because I forgot all my points. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sarah Watkins.
Hello, committee. My name is Sarah Watkins. I live in the 7th Ward. I'm a mother and a renter, and I organize tenants with Tenants Transforming Greater St. Louis. In transparency, I usually have something more polished and prepared, but I'm honestly kind of pissed off, so I don't have that today. I'm here to testify in opposition of the proposed budget. There are programs that people have expressed at the last opportunity to speak, the only opportunity to speak. Code Blue was requested $3.5 million. This budget has $2 million allocated, which leaves a $1.5 million gap. The Office of Violence Prevention requested $12.9 million, 8.8 was allocated, which leaves a $4 million gap. I also want to talk about right to counsel because I and my community spent a lot of time advocating for this program. And I want to actually address some of my comments to the Board of ENA because this is where this budget came from. So Comptroller Donna Behringer, earlier this year, she agreed to meet with housing advocates about fully funding the program, the Right to Counsel program, and she said she wasn't familiar with it, actually. I found that disrespectful and dismissive of the needs of the most marginalized and vulnerable constituents in this city. It showed to me that she was disconnected from renters, the almost 60% of the city's population that she was elected to represent. While landlords and corporations extracted wealth during the pandemic, families, Black women, children, and our elders were being thrown out of their homes at alarming rates. The Tenants' Right to Counsel program was the result of many renters and advocates organizing to disrupt the mass displacement of St. Louis. To me, her vote to abstain was out of touch in revealing to voters where her true interests lie with her donors like Enterprise, who cooperate with ICE, and St. Louis Realtors Association, who spends time and money lobbying against tenant protections. Mayor Kara Spencer, as Alderwoman, you voted in favor of right to counsel and you supported stronger enforcement around negligent landlords. During candidate forums and debates, you aligned yourself as an ally and you used broad talking points claiming you have a long track record of fighting slumlords. And I listened closely because I lived in the 20th Ward for years under a slumlord, like many of my neighbors in Dutchtown. So I know that you're friends with Southside slumlords like Jason Goldcamp and Joel Rutherford. And we know your billionaire developer, Bob Clark, made the largest donation to your campaign. And I'll make sure that truly confront cycles of interruption. But I have to remind you that Action St. Louis organized an email and a petition protesting the police budget. And you replied, and you said that you would vote no on any budget that allocated funding over the state requirement. I don't think that's happened, and I just want to remind you of the commitment that you made. Lastly, I believe that housing is a human right and that our land belongs to the people, not greedy developers and landowners like Bob Clark and Paul McKee. And this budget belongs to the people of St. Louis, not a state-controlled police department. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Carrie McCullen. Is it McCullen or McCracken?
Hi, it's Carrie McCullen. I live in Ward 2. Hello, committee. I'm just here to add my name to the list of all the folks who are opposed to the police budget. We shouldn't give the police a single cent over what they are legally entitled to, not a single cent. The proposed budget for the police makes no sense. In the winter, unhoused people like Marlo Blanks live outside. They're forced to live outside through frostbite and amputations, and they are discharged back into the freezing cold weather, many without even a coat. He called 211 for shelter this past winter and was on hold for hours. It makes no sense. We need to fund the Office of Violent Prevention, fully fund Right to Counsel, and fund Code Blue. Fund the programs that work, fund the programs that prevent crime and help people, not the police. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Donnie Khan. He is our last speaker.
She. Thanks. Hello, I'm Danny Kahn. I'm from Ward 2. I advocate for the city to stop treating the symptoms of poverty and address the root cause with creative solutions. Lucky for all of us, we have an opportunity to do that thanks to the tireless work of community members who are leading initiatives that address the root causes of what they are used to supposedly treat. Right to Counsel needs another $1.5 million. Office of Violence Prevention needs another $4.1 million. Code Blue needs another $1.5 million. I'm not sure about the Office of New Americans, but I believe they need more money as well, especially with the ICE onslaught that we're seeing terrorizing our communities lately, and the police collaboration with them, frankly. Each of these programs has shown the ability to create public safety at the root, whereas the Missouri Board of Police Commissioners have only shown corruption and violence. I would even chalk up their budget request as extortion, and I reiterate Alderman Browning and Alderwoman Saunier's view that it represents an existential threat to the city. They tried to bankrupt us. They do not deserve a dollar more, at least more than legally necessary. If it were up to me, I would not be awarding even the legal minimum and encourage the city to fight for our autonomy from Jefferson City takeover in court. It disgusts me that any more money is given to the police department we don't have control of, and as we saw at the State of the City, the mayor doesn't have control of them either. So take more money away from the police to fully fund Right to Counsel, the Office of Violence Prevention, Code Blue. Collect taxes from deadbeat developers. I know Green Street owes upwards of $3 million in unpaid taxes. And this is the least of the reasons Green Street is a parasite on our city, but some of that would still need to go to St. Louis Public Schools, but the rest could be funding Right to Counsel, for example. Finally, and I know this isn't pertaining to the general fund, but we need to be directing the bulk, if not all, of the Rams settlement fund to the north side. There is no better investment we can make than directly into the people of North St. Louis. Thank you.
Next, we have Kennard Williams.
Hello, good morning, members of the committee. My name is Kennard Williams. I am a resident of the 9th Ward, and I am the senior organizer at Action St. Louis. Many of you have heard the phrase, closed mouths don't get fed. And what we've seen repeatedly is members of the community being absolutely required to speak and to show up in both ENA meetings, these meetings, in order to be heard by their elected officials, in order to tell you what we need to see money going towards. Dozens of people turned out to provide 4 hours of testimony for that last ENA meeting. Many of them talking about funding tornado recovery, Right to Counsel, and the Office of Violence Prevention. What message does it send to the people of this city when not only representatives of the department nor the state-appointed police board will show up and explain to the public why they are intent on bank robbing and robbing the city? Even worse, what message does it send to the people of this city when they don't show up and they still get what they asked for? We are in the middle of the fight for the spirit of St. Louis, and working class people are struggling every day to make ends meet. We have to take a step back and look at what we are doing when we are funding programs like Right to Counsel, when we are underfunding things such as the tenant relocation fund, when we're not funding the Office of Violence Prevention. What are we doing? We saw the police ask for $5 million alone just to account for lawsuits that they expect to rack up. People they expect to kill, people they expect to maim, people they expect to injure, people whose constitutional rights that they are going to infringe upon. That $5 million can fund Right to Counsel all the way. That can fund the Office of Violence Prevention all the way. What does it look like when we have a hungry beast and we continue to feed it and it continues to eat everything at the expense of the people in this city. I am urging you to invest in the people, to reject this budget, and do not give them a cent more than what they are owed. Thank you.
Thank you. That will be all.
Before we close, is there anybody that came in late that want to testify? Anybody online? If the baby want to testify, please do. That's the most important voice. All right. I do want to thank everybody for coming out today and all the individuals that came out for the ENA public hearing as well. There will be, we was going to try to schedule to have a public hearing this week, but it'll probably be the following week, and we're looking at the Boys and Girls Club, which will be Saturday at 10 a.m. on the 16th at Boys and Girls Club Herbert Hoover. So again, thank you all for continuing to come out and have your voices heard. As over the next few weeks, our meeting is public. We will be hearing from various departments. Just this week for the public education, we will hear tomorrow from the mayor's office. We will hear from the President Board of Aldermen, the Comptroller Office, Recorder of Deeds, Planning and Urban Design Department, Director of Public Safety. Wednesday, Office of Violence Prevention, Fire Department, Parks, Recreation, and the Treasurer's Office. And then we'll wrap up the week Thursday from here from the Building Division, Corrections, Civilian Oversight, and the License Collector Office. So please, if you can't make it to hear those budgets, ones that may be important, I know OVP was mentioned several times. They'll be here Wednesday at 9:30, but if you can't make it in person, all our meetings are on YouTube where you can always watch them as well. Any following comments from any committee members? Seeing none, again, Board Bill 1 will be held as we'll be going through it. Do we have any acknowledgement of written testimony, Madam Clerk?
We have none.
Any announcements from committee members? All members was present, so I'll take a motion to adjourn. Moved by the Alderman from the 6th, seconded by the Alderman from the 9th. All in favor, aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.